I should have known something was off the moment I pulled into the gravel driveway of the roadside motel. It wasn't the flickering neon sign or the way the wind seemed to howl louder here than anywhere else along the highway. It was the silence, the unnerving, unnatural silence that descended as soon as I parked my car. The motel was small, just 8 rooms in a row, with peeling paint and crooked doors. A vending machine by the office hummed faintly, but even that seemed subdued, as if afraid to make too much noise. I was exhausted from driving all day, and the thought of spending the night here didn't exactly thrill me. But it was cheap, and the gas station clerk had assured me it was the only place for miles. I stepped into the office, the little bell on the door jingling softly. The man behind the counter looked up, his face gaunt and pale. His eyes darted to the window, then back to me. "Need a room?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Yeah," I replied, setting my wallet on the counter. "Just for the night." "Ned!" He slid a key across the counter without asking for my name. Room 5. I noticed that his hand trembled slightly as he handed it over. "Just one rule," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Don't open room 6. Don't knock on the door. Don't look inside. Understand?" I blinked, caught off guard by the odd specificity of the rule. "Sure," I said slowly. "Any reason why?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned his attention to a ledger on the counter, his body language dismissive. It was clear the conversation was over. A strange night. Room 5 was dingy but serviceable. The bed sagged in the middle, the wallpaper was peeling, and the single light bulb flickered sporadically. I threw my bag onto the chair and flopped onto the bed. My body ached from hours on the road, and I was too tired to care about the state of the room. But as I lay there, staring at the stained ceiling, my curiosity grew. What was the deal with room 6? It was directly next to mine, and even through the thin walls, I could hear nothing from the adjacent room. No footsteps, no muffled voices, nothing. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a gimmick to make the motel seem more interesting. Maybe the owner just liked messing with people. Still, the thought nagged at me. By 11 p.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a bottle of water from my bag and stepped outside for some air. The night was cold and still, the only sound the crunch of gravel under my shoes. I glanced toward room 6. The door looked the same as all the others, though the number was slightly askew. A faint yellow light glowed from under the door. I hesitated. The owner's warning replayed in my head, but it only fueled my curiosity. I stepped closer, my breath visible in the chilly air. I raised a hand to knock, but stopped myself. Instead, I pressed my ear against the door. Nothing, not even the hum of the light, the first glimpse. I returned to my room, determined to forget about room 6. I locked the door, turned off the light, and buried myself under the covers. But sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the building made me tense. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. And then, around 2 a.m., I heard it. A faint scraping noise, like nails against wood. It was coming from room 6. I sat up, my heart racing. The sound stopped for a moment, then resumed, louder this time. It wasn't just scraping. It was accompanied by a low, guttural moan. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know what was going on. Grabbing my phone for light, I crept back outside. The night seemed darker now, the air heavier. I approached room 6, my hands trembling. The scraping continued, relentless and rhythmic. I tried the doorknob. It was locked. Then, to my horror, the scraping stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I turned to leave, but a voice stopped me in my tracks. "Help me." It was faint, almost a whisper, but it was unmistakable. It came from inside room 6. Breaking the rule! Against my better judgment, I decided to act. I told myself I was just checking if someone needed help, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I needed to see what was inside. I retrieved a paperclip from my bag and bent it into a makeshift lockpick. My hands shook as I worked the lock, the faint click of the tumblers sounding deafening in the stillness. Finally, the lock gave way and the door creaked open. The room was pitch black. My phone's flashlight illuminated a scene that sent chills down my spine. The walls were covered in deep scratches, as if something with claws had been trapped here for years. The bed was broken, its frame twisted and splintered. The air was thick with a metallic scent. Blood. And then I saw it. In the corner of the room, crouched and motionless, was a figure. Its skin was pale and stretched taut over its bones, its eyes sunken and lifeless. It turned its head slowly, its gaze locking onto mine. "Help me," it whispered again, though its mouth didn't move. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering. The figure stood, its movements jerky and unnatural. It was taller than I'd thought, impossibly tall, its limbs elongated and twisted. And then it smiled. The escape. I bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me. The lock clicked into place, but I didn't stop running until I was back in room 5. I locked the door and shoved the chair under the doorknob for good measure. My chest heaved and my hands were slick with sweat. The silence returned, oppressive and deafening. I tried to convince myself it was over, that whatever I'd seen couldn't leave room 6. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on my door. I froze, my blood running cold. The knocking stopped, but then the scraping began again. This time, it was coming from my window. I didn't dare look. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the door, leaving my belongings behind. The motel was eerily quiet as I ran to my car, the only sound my ragged breathing. I didn't look back as I sped down the highway, the neon sign disappearing in my rearview mirror. Aftermath. I drove through the night, not stopping until I reached a crowded rest area miles away. I tried to make sense of what had happened, but the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That I broke into a room and saw something? Days later, I looked up the motel online. There was no trace of it. No reviews, no address, nothing. It was as if it had never existed. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. The scraping, the whispers. Help me. And I wonder if I left something behind, or if something followed me.